care about what other people think, and you will always be their prisoner. Lao Tzu. Look into a muddy pond, and you'll only see a distorted reflection. When people look at your life and tell you that you can't do something, they aren't actually looking at you. They're looking at the muddy waters of their own fear, their own failed attempts, and their own inability to commit. They're likely projecting their insecurities onto your path. It's the classic crabs in a bucket mentality. If they can't climb out, they're going to try to pull you back down with them. But sometimes people doubt you because your track record has given them a reason to. And to be fair, nobody enjoys feeling dismissed. Nobody enjoys hearing somebody downplay their goals, questioning their judgment, or looking at them like they've lost their mind. So as it relates to self-evaluation, have you actually followed through on what you said you'd do? Or have you just talked a big game? Do you have a track record of starting things, then quitting the moment it gets uncomfortable? When things don't work out, do you only offer excuses? You can't blame them for expecting you to fold again. You've built that reputation. If somebody doubts you and it instantly hits a nerve, there's usually a reason it hit one. Maybe somewhere deep down, you might not completely believe yourself yet either. However, if their doubts are just their own baggage, ignore them and walk your path. Now, someone can criticize you, mock what you're trying to build, question your decisions, and you're able to brush it off. On the other hand, somebody says that specific thing and it sticks in your head for days. You replay it over and over while you're driving to work, while you're lying in bed at night, or when you're trying to actually focus and work on what they've critiqued you for. And many of us think our emotional reactions are proof that somebody crossed a line. Yes, sometimes they are. But sometimes the reaction is exposing something you were already wrestling with privately. If somebody says, "You'll probably quit like you always do," and it immediately bothers you, the real question isn't whether they should have said it. The real question is whether part of you believes it as well. And that makes us uncomfortable because we like to think that confidence means we're unaffected by the outside noise. But true confidence can admit uncertainty without collapsing under it. But in all reality, many of us spend years trying to silence the external doubt instead of dealing with internal inconsistency. That's why some people become obsessed with proving everybody wrong. They're trying to outrun a private fear that maybe the criticism was accurate, and every achievement becomes emotional validation for them. However, the problem is that eventually you start performing your life instead of living it. You stop asking, "Is this meaningful?" and start asking, "Will this finally make people respect me?" Then, if you're not careful, somebody else's doubt can become the center of your identity. Whereas one of the biggest mistakes people make with criticism is treating all doubt like it comes from the same place. Some people most definitely project their own fear onto others. They gave up on themselves, so ambition makes them uncomfortable. Discipline reminds them of the standards that they've stopped holding. And risk irritates them because they've built their identity around playing it safe. Granted, that's not everybody. Sometimes people doubt you because they've watched your patterns. They've heard the speeches before. They've seen the motivation spikes, the new plans, the big declarations, and then watch the consistency disappear just as quickly. If you automatically label every critic as negative, you remove your ability to self-correct. You start protecting your ego instead of evaluating your behavior. There are many of us right now claiming that we're misunderstood when the real issue is we've trained everyone around us not to trust our words. We've developed the habit of the emotion of commitment instead of having disciplined commitment, which are quite different. Emotional commitment says, I mean it right now. Discipline commitment says, I'll still be here when the emotion wears off. And people notice that difference over time, whether they say it out loud or not. Equally, deep down, most of us know this. That's why certain criticism feels unfair, while other criticism feels irritatingly accurate. That doesn't mean you let other people define you, but it also doesn't mean you ignore every negative opinion because it hurts your feelings. You have to acknowledge that sometimes accountability sounds encouraging, sometimes it sounds disappointing. And if you're mature enough to tell the difference, you become much harder to knock you off kilter. On the other hand, this is where a lot of us hit a crossroads we don't realize we're standing at. Because once you realize some criticism is valid and some isn't, you're left with a decision that we often try to avoid. It's being honest about who you actually are, not who you could become, not what your intentions are, not your potential, just your current patterns of practice. And that's hard for many of us to admit. It's easy to defend yourself when somebody's wrong about you. It's much harder when they're even only partially right, especially when they're pointing out something you've already been privately negotiating with yourself over. Maybe it's your inconsistency, your excuses, how you start strong and routinely fade out, the a lot of talking and the less doing, or you wanting the recognition without fully accepting the cost associated with it. That's where self-honesty becomes leverage. Because once you stop wasting your energy protecting your self-image, you can start improving your actual behavior. And many of us are trying to maintain the appearance of capability instead of building capability. We want to be perceived as disciplined more than we want the daily structure discipline actually requires. No matter what, reality catches up to everybody. You can only explain away the patterns for so long before you have to admit the pattern is you, which can either crush you or force you to accept the facts. And in all reality, when you can stop feeling attacked every time somebody points out a weakness, you're able to start receiving feedback differently. Not emotionally, not defensively, but as a compass point to help you stay on course. Now, I get it. Not all of it is useful. The same as not all of it is fair. But much of it is always worth considering. And you need to stop automatically being uncomfortable just because something uncomfortable was pointed out. Conversely, there's another component of critique and opinions. People are usually very supportive of change until the change starts becoming real. At first, your goals are entertaining. They're hypothetical. In theory, everybody likes the idea of somebody improving themselves when they're starting that business, getting healthier, changing their careers, becoming more disciplined. However, once your behavior actually starts shifting, something often changes in those around you. More than likely, it isn't obvious, but the jokes will get a little more piercing. The encouragement gets a little less frequent. Then they'll start mentioning why something probably won't work. Again, not blatantly direct, not to the point that they sound mean, but enough to introduce doubt. And the thing is, many times they may not realize that they're doing it because your growth forces comparison, whether they intend it to or not. It creates an uncomfortable mirror for them. Your actions challenge the excuses they've gotten used to telling themselves. That's why people will sometimes try to pull you backwards towards the previous version of you, the version that made them feel comfortable because your standards stayed close to theirs. And again, in most instances, they probably aren't consciously trying to sabotage you. But as human beings, we instinctually protect our identity and social comfort. So if your growth disrupts that comfort, resistance can show up in various ways. Maybe it's that sarcasm, minimizing your efforts or your goals, discouragement, or making you feel like your discipline has become some sort of obsession. And if you're not careful, you can find yourself allowing them to pull you back just to make them more comfortable to be around you. Now, here's where this whole thing can take a turn a lot of us don't expect. Yes, being doubted can absolutely motivate you. Sometimes anger gets you moving. Sometimes embarrassment forces a level of discipline that should have been there earlier. And sometimes hearing, "you can't," wakes something up in you. But that fuel has limits. If your drive becomes more about proving people wrong, eventually your life starts revolving around the audience, not your ambitions. And that's a strange realization when it finally hits. Because you can work hard trying to silence the critics, earning someone's validation, or reaching that point where people finally acknowledge your value. But then once you achieve it, you'll likely realize the emotional payoff is short-lived, if at all. You have to realize that external approval doesn't resolve internal uncertainty. It only distracts you from it temporarily. That's why some highly successful people still seem restless, still defensive, still obsessed with getting that recognition. In essence, their accomplishments became tied to emotional revenge instead of grounded purpose. Every decision becomes reactive, and you'll say things like, "I'll show them. They're going to regret doubting me." One day they'll see. And maybe they will, or maybe they won't. But this is where many of us accidentally hand over control of our life to people we might claim not to care about. If that becomes the center of your motivation, you're still emotionally attached to their opinion, whether you admit it or not. So at some point, your standards have to become independent from the applause, the criticism, the jealousy, their praise or validation. Otherwise, your discipline will always fluctuate based on how emotionally seen you feel by other people. Whereas the people who become the most grounded usually stop treating their life like a performance directed at the critics. They stop chasing emotional victory and start focusing on alignment with their goals. And ironically, that's usually when outside opinions start losing their power altogether. At the end of the day, people are going to think what they think. Some will underestimate you. Some will quietly root against you. Some will support you until your growth starts making them uncomfortable. And some will believe in you long before you deserve it. However, none of that changes the work. Because eventually, the conversation stops being about whether other people believe in you and starts becoming about whether your habits actually support the person you claim you want to become. That's the part that doesn't get solved through motivation. It gets solved in ordinary movements. Following through when nobody's checking on you. Staying consistent after the emotion fades. Keeping promises you made to yourself or someone else. And continuing when there's no recognition connected to it. Most people are looking for confidence before they move. But a lot of confidence is built after movement, not before it. After there's repetition. After there's proof. After enough days where your actions start arguing with the words you say. And maybe that's the real shift. Not becoming immune to doubt. Not pretending criticism never affects you. Just becoming more grounded in reality instead of reaction. Because once your life becomes built around standards instead of the ups and downs of emotions, other people's opinions stop feeling like commands and become noise. Sometimes it can be accurate. More often, it's arrogant. But always just noise. And the quieter that noise becomes, the more clear you actually become. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and keep showing up.